He almost didn't open the door. It had been 3 years since Margaret died, and 3 years of evenings that all looked the same. The same porch, the same cold, the same silence that settled over the farm like something permanent. Rex would lie near the hearth, Jack would sit in the chair by the window, and the night would pass the way nights do when a man has stopped expecting anything from them. So when Rex lifted his head suddenly and growled low toward the door, Jack didn't move right away. He just listened. Wind. Fields. And then, faint, uncertain footsteps on the dirt path outside. He rose slowly, reached for his jacket, and opened the door to find a woman standing at the edge of his porch light, her heels pressed into the soft earth, her expensive coat completely wrong for this road, holding a phone with no signal like it was the most useless thing she'd ever owned. She looked at him. He looked at her, and Rex stepped forward from the shadows, not barking, not lunging, just standing, steady and certain, the way he always stood when something was about to matter. Out on the road behind her, maybe a quarter-mile back, a black luxury car sat dark and motionless on the shoulder. No hazard lights, no movement. Just a very expensive machine that had picked the worst possible place to give up. Amelia Hartley was not a woman who panicked. She had built a company from a single rented office and a second-hand desk. She had sat across from men twice her age who tried to rattle her and walked away with everything she came for. She did not panic. She did not ask for help. She did not need it. But standing here, in the dirt, in the cold, at the edge of a stranger's porch light with a German shepherd studying her like a question she hadn't answered yet, she understood, quietly and completely, that none of that mattered here. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said. Her voice was steadier than she felt. "My car broke down back on the road. I don't have any signal." Jack looked at her for a moment. Then he reached back inside, grabbed his heavier coat off the hook by the door, and stepped out onto the porch. "You shouldn't be out on that road after dark," he said. Not as a criticism, just as a fact. "Come inside, it's getting cold." No questions, no hesitation, just a door held open and boots already moving. The house was small, there was no other word for it. Small and plain and worn in the patient way that honest things wear down, not from neglect, but from use. The floors were clean, the counters were clear, everything in its place, the way a man keeps a space when order is the only thing he can fully control. Amelia stepped inside, and her eyes moved slowly around the room. There was a folded American flag on the shelf near the window, the kind presented at funerals, pressed into sharp, perfect triangles and never unfolded again. Beside it, a framed photograph, Jack in uniform, younger, standing among men with their arms around each other's shoulders, squinting into some foreign sun. She looked at the faces of those men. She didn't know them, but something in the way they stood together told her that not all of them had made it home. And then, on the small table near the window, a single framed photograph of a woman. Not military, not formal, just a woman standing in a field in summer light, laughing at something off camera, her hair loose, her hand raised to shield her eyes from the sun. The kind of photograph that captures someone in the middle of being completely, unselfishly alive. Amelia looked away. Jack set a chipped mug of coffee on the table in front of her, without ceremony. "It's not much," he said. She wrapped both hands around it. It was the best thing she'd tasted all week. Rex settled near the hearth, his head resting on his front paws, his eyes still on her. Not suspicious anymore, just watching, the way he watched everything in this house, with a steady, devoted attention that felt almost like guardianship, like he understood that this place and the man in it were worth protecting. Amelia sat in the warmth and the quiet and looked again at the photograph of the woman laughing in the field. There was something about that image she couldn't set aside, the freedom in it, the joy, the way the woman looked like someone who had never once doubted that she was exactly where she belonged. She wondered who she was. She didn't ask. Jack didn't say much. He pulled on his heavier coat, gathered his tools from the cabinet near the back door, and headed out into the dark without fanfare. Rex rose immediately to follow, and Jack paused at the door just for a moment and looked down at the dog. Something passed between them that needed no words. Then both of them disappeared into the night together. Amelia stood at the doorway and watched. Under the narrow beam of a flashlight, Jack worked with the quiet efficiency of someone who had spent a lifetime solving problems with his hands. No frustration in his movements, no impatience, just steady, methodical work, the kind that trusted process over urgency. The wind came across the field in cold waves, pressing against him, and he didn't flinch. Rex sat a few feet away in the dark, ears up, watching the edges of the light the way he always watched the edges of things. Alert, patient, completely devoted to the man kneeling in the cold. Amelia went back inside. She sat at the table and held her coffee and looked once more at the photograph of the woman in the field. And this time, for reasons she couldn't quite explain, her chest felt tight. When Jack came back in, his hands were red from the cold. He set his tools down, washed up at the sink without rushing, and dried his hands on a dish towel that had been folded exactly in half. "You should be good now," he said. Amelia stood. "Thank you. Truly." She reached into her purse and pulled out a fold of bills. More than enough, she thought, more than generous. "Please, I want you to take this." Jack didn't look at the money. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carrying the same quiet steadiness it had held all evening. "Out here, you help when someone needs it. That's it." He said it without pride, without performance, the way you say something that has simply always been true. Amelia lowered the money slowly. She looked at him. This man in his worn flannel and his clean house with his folded flag and his photograph of a laughing woman, and felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Small. Not humiliated, not diminished, just small, in the way that standing under a wide sky makes you feel small, like scale had been restored. Like she had been reminded of her actual size in the world, and it was oddly, unexpectedly comforting. She said goodnight. She walked to her car. It started perfectly. But she sat there for a long moment before pulling away, engine running, hands on the wheel, watching the lit window, the man's shadow moving inside, the dog settling back onto the porch like a sentinel returning to his post. Something had shifted. She didn't have a name for it yet. Back in the city, in her glass office on the 14th floor, Amelia Hartley sat behind a desk that cost more than most people's cars and looked out at a skyline she had spent 15 years working toward. Her assistant brought the morning briefing. Her phone lit up with the names of people who needed things from her. She ignored all of it. She said quietly, "Pull everything you can find on a property, rural, off Route 9, about 40 miles past the county line. Farmhouse. Owner's name is Jack Thompson." Her assistant nodded with professional neutrality and left without asking questions. The report came back that afternoon. Amelia read it alone, door closed, phone face down on the desk. The farm had been in slow decline for years. Bad seasons, rising costs, Debt that had compounded quietly in the background the way debt does when a person is too proud or too exhausted to address it. And at the bottom of the report, in plain administrative language that somehow made it worse for being so plain, foreclosure proceedings initiated, final notice issued. She set the paper down. She thought about the folded flag. She thought about the photograph of the men squinting into a foreign sun, arms around each other, not all of them coming home. She thought about the woman laughing in the field. And then something happened that hadn't happened to Amelia Hartley in a very long time. Her eyes filled. Not from sadness exactly, from something harder to name, the particular ache of understanding too late what something is worth, of recognizing in someone else's life a kind of devotion and dignity that her own had somewhere along the way stopped making room for. She sat with it for a long time. The city moved outside her window, indifferent and constant. Then she picked up the phone. Jack Thompson did not receive many letters, so when the plain white envelope appeared in the mailbox at the end of the dirt track one cold morning, he noticed it immediately. No return address. His name written in careful handwriting he didn't recognize. He pulled it out and stood right there at the end of the drive, Rex sitting at his heel, the morning frost still on the fields, and opened it. Inside was a single document. He read it once, then again, then a third time, slower, as though the words might change or clarify, or turn out to mean something different on a third reading. Loan status, paid in full. He stood absolutely still. The wind moved through the field. A bird crossed the pale sky somewhere above the tree line. Rex looked up at him, not with confusion, but with that particular quality of attention that dogs give when they sense something shifting in the person they love most. He pressed his head gently, slowly against Jack's leg, and Jack reached down without thinking and rested his hand on the dog's neck. His fingers found the familiar warmth of fur, the steady, living weight of him, and he just stood there in the cold morning, holding a piece of paper that didn't feel real. He thought about Margaret. He thought about coming home from his last deployment to find her standing on this porch, thinner than he remembered, smiling like nothing in the world was wrong. Rex bouncing around her feet like a puppy, even though he was 4 years old by then. He thought about the one perfect season they'd had together on this land after he came home for good. The spring she planted the garden along the south fence. The summer evenings on the porch when neither of them needed to say anything because everything that mattered was already right there. The way she'd talked to Rex like he understood every word, which Jack had always secretly believed he did. He thought about the 8 months after the diagnosis, about watching someone brave pretend to be braver than they were for his sake, about the morning he stood at a different kind of paperwork and understood that she was gone. She had kept this farm alive while he was deployed, through seasons she faced alone, through difficulties she never once put in a letter because she didn't want him to worry. She had held this land together with her own hands. He had kept it alive since she left because it was the last place she had ever stood, the last place she had laughed, the last place that still held, in its worn floors, in its south fence, in its cold morning air, some trace of her. And now, somehow, from a direction he hadn't seen coming, from a kindness he hadn't asked for, it was safe. Rex pressed harder against his leg. Jack's hand tightened in the dog's fur. And standing there at the end of the dirt drive, in the cold, in the quiet, with the fields stretching out in every direction the way they had stretched out every morning of his life on this land. Jack Thompson let himself cry. Not from grief this time, from something rarer and harder to hold on to, from gratitude. She came back at sunset. Same road, same fields, gold now in the late light, the sky going deep orange above the tree line. Jack was on the porch when the black car turned up the dirt track, and he walked down the steps slowly, Rex moving beside him, both of them watching it come. Amelia stepped out. No heels this time, no designer coat, just a plain jacket and boots that were still a little too clean for this road, and an expression on her face that Jack recognized, the look of someone who has done something they can't take back and isn't entirely sure how it will be received. "You again," he said quietly. "I thought you should know," she said, "that it was me." Jack was quiet for a moment. Rex sat between them. The wind moved through the field. "Why?" Jack finally asked. Amelia took a slow breath. "Because you helped me when I had nothing to offer you." Jack looked at her for a long moment, then he shook his head slightly, the way a man does when he's about to say something simple that took a long time to understand. "You had plenty," he said. She frowned slightly. He nodded toward her, not her coat, not her car, just her. "You just hadn't used it yet." They stood there in the fading light, the three of them, while the sky turned deep and the fields went still, and the farm that Margaret had once worked with her own hands settled quietly into another evening. Rex looked up at Jack. Jack looked out at the horizon, and Amelia Hartley, who had built everything she owned from nothing, who had spent 15 years proving she didn't need anyone, stood in the dirt of a small farm at the edge of nowhere and felt, for the first time in longer than she could honestly remember, that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Not powerful, not successful, just human. And for tonight, that was more than enough. Sometimes the people who have the least to give are the ones who remind us what giving really means. Jack Thompson never asked for anything. He helped because it was right. He stayed because he loved. He held on because some things are worth holding on to, even when everything else says let go. And in doing so, without ever intending to, without ever knowing the full weight of what one quiet act of kindness would set in motion, he changed a woman who thought she had everything and showed her what she had been missing all along. Real strength is quiet. Real kindness doesn't keep score. And the most important things we can offer another person are time, our presence, our willingness to show up without being asked. Those things cannot be bought, no matter how much is in your wallet. If this story stirred something in you, if it reminded you of someone you've loved, something you've held on to, or a kindness that once reached you from an unexpected place, then you already understand what Jack and Rex Tales is all about. Subscribe to Jack and Rex Tales and join the family of people who still believe that loyalty, kindness, and quiet courage are the most powerful forces on this earth. Every week, we bring you another story that reminds us of that truth. Another reason to believe that goodness is still out there, in small towns, on quiet roads, in the hearts of people the world too often overlooks. New stories every week. We'll see you there. This story carries values worth remembering long after the final word. It reminds us that genuine generosity asks for nothing in return. Jack didn't help Amelia because he expected payment or recognition. He helped because someone needed it, and he was there. In a world that measures almost everything by transaction, that kind of giving is quietly revolutionary. It teaches us that humility is not weakness, it is wisdom. Amelia arrived believing her wealth gave her power. She left understanding that the most powerful thing she encountered that night couldn't be bought at any price. It shows us that grief doesn't have to break us. Jack lost soldiers, lost his wife, nearly lost the farm, and still he got up every morning, kept his house clean, cared for Rex, and helped strangers in the dark. That is courage in its quietest and most honest form. It honors rural American life and the values rooted in it: neighborly duty, hard work, and dignity without applause, values that deserve to be remembered and celebrated. It reminds us that a dog's loyalty is one of the purest things on this earth. Nex never needed to be asked. He was simply always there. And above all, it leaves us with this truth: one small act of kindness on one cold night saved a man's home, changed a woman's life, and reminded both of them what really matters. We never know how far our kindness travels. That is exactly why we should never stop giving it.